A massive blaze tore through a nightclub in Thailand, killing at least 14 people and injuring more than 40.
Engineers are now inspecting the one-story building amid fears it could collapse. More details on this later in the news. Good evening, I'm CJ Hero.
And I'm Nina Richie Alago Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. And now for the headlines.
China's foreign ministry imposes sanctions against U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi following her visit to Taiwan. As China fires its ballistic missiles around Taiwan, a group of U.S. naval vessels led by USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier deployed to monitor the Taiwan region. Philippine inflation in July accelerates to 6.4%, driven by faster food price hikes and higher transport fares. Metro Manila and Cordillera region elevated to moderate risk classification for COVID-19. And Washington declares monkeypox a public health emergency.
China's foreign ministry has imposed sanctions against U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi after her visit to Taiwan. The ministry said Beijing would implement sanctions against Pelosi and her immediate family without giving further details. Beijing accused Pelosi of seriously interfering in China's internal affairs and seriously undermining China's sovereignty and territorial integrity with her visit. It did not specify punitive measures, but in previous instances, China imposed visa restrictions and forbade entering China and doing business with Chinese entities. Meanwhile, China's ambassador Qin Gang was summoned to the White House as Washington condemned Beijing's provocative actions around Taiwan following Pelosi's visit to Taipei. At the same time, Qin was reportedly told the U.S. maintains its one China policy and wishes to maintain open lines of communication.
The United States condemns China's live-fire exercises around Taiwan and confirms the deployment of U.S. naval vessels in the region. China, on the other hand, claims its action is a defensive move against U.S. provocations. Wang de la Fuente reports.
The United States has described China's launch of 11 ballistic missiles around Taiwan during its military drills as an overreaction to U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island, urging Beijing to decrease tensions. The U.S. House Speaker was the highest-profile U.S. official to visit Taiwan in years, defying a series of stark threats from Beijing, which views the self-ruled island as its territory. In retaliation, China launched a series of exercises in multiple zones around Taiwan, straddling some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world and at some point just 20 kilometers from the island shore.
We condemn these actions, which are irresponsible and at odds with our long-standing goal of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and in the region. China has chosen to overreact and use the Speaker's visit as a pretext to increase provocative military activity in and around the Taiwan Strait.
U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby says the U.S. is prepared for whatever Beijing chooses to do, but it neither seeks nor wants a crisis. However, Kirby says Washington will not be deterred from operating in the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific.
We will not seek, nor do we want, a crisis. At the same time, we will not be deterred from operating in the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific, consistent with international law, as we have for decades, supporting Taiwan and defending a free and open Indo-Pacific. To that end, Secretary Austin today has directed that the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan and the ships in her strike group will remain on station in the general area to monitor the situation.
The U.S. officials said their position on the One China policy has not changed, and they do not support Taiwan's independence as opposed to Pelosi's statement. Meanwhile, China's foreign ministry said that their action is in self-defense against the United States provocations. Chinese Foreign Minister spokesperson Wang Wenbin said they have maintained diplomatic communications with U.S., but it made a malicious provocations first. China stressed that its defensive countermeasures are based on international and domestic laws and go through serious and careful consideration. Wang De La Fuente reporting for Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
Taiwan blasted its evil neighbor next door after China encircled the island with a series of huge military drills condemned by the United States and other Western allies. During military exercises, which started Thursday and continued Friday, China fired ballistic missiles and deployed both fighter jets and warships around Taiwan. Exercises are expected to occur until midday Sunday, having Chinese fighter jets and ships crossing the median line that runs down the Taiwan Strait. Beijing has called its war games a necessary response to a visit to the self-ruled democratic island by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, but Washington countered that China's leaders had chosen to overreact. Taiwan's Premier Su Tseng-chang, meanwhile, called for allies to push for de-escalation.
U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's flight to Taiwan, which bolstered American support for the island nation but angered China, was the single most heavily tracked flight in the history of the online flight tracking site Flight Radar 24. The website, which tracks planes' location and speed, said more than 708,000 people across the globe were tracking the flight when it landed in the Taiwanese capital of Taipei. Moreover, around 2.9 million people tracked at least a portion of the flight amid uncertainty about whether Pelosi would follow through on her pledge to visit the island nation whose independence is not recognized by China. Pelosi's visit, being a surprise part of her Asia tour, grabbed people's attention all over the globe, raising concerns about how China would respond. Operated by the U.S. Air Force, a Boeing C-40C jet was used to safely deliver U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi from Kuala Lumpur to Taipei, having its call sign SPAR-19.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken condemned China's military drills encircling Taiwan as a significant escalation. Blinken said there was no justification for the exercises launched by Beijing in response to a visit to Taiwan by U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. China fired ballistic missiles and deployed fighter jets and warships around Taiwan, declaring multiple no-go danger zones in some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world.
We anticipated that China might take steps like this. In fact, we described this exact scenario. The fact is, the Speaker's visit was peaceful. There is no justification for this extreme, disproportionate. The United States has conveyed to the PRC consistently and repeatedly that we do not seek and will not provoke a crisis. President Tsai has said the same thing.
But Beijing has insisted its war games are a necessary response to Pelosi's visit.
We've all seen the sentencing.
On another state matter, Blinken said the U.S. will pursue Russia's latest offer to discuss at the presidential level a prisoner swap involving detained basketball star Brittany Griner.
Are very significant concern. We've all seen the sentencing, conviction of Brittany Griner to 9 years in prison, and that further compounds the injustice that's being done to her and her wrongful detention. It puts a spotlight on our very significant concern with Russia's legal system and the Russian government's use of wrongful detentions to advance its own agenda, using individuals as political pawns. The same goes for Paul Whelan.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov confirms that Moscow is willing to discuss the issue through a special channel agreed upon by the presidents.
Мы готовы эту тему обсуждать, но в рамках в рамках того канала, который был согласован президентами Путиным и Байденом.
However, Lavrov reminded that if the Americans still decide to engage in public diplomacy and make resounding statements about what they are going to do now, that is their business and even their problem.
Malacanang is strictly monitoring the deteriorating relations between Taiwan and China following the visit of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to the island. However, the palace has not confirmed if the matter will be tackled at the meeting between President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken tomorrow. Cesar Alvarez has the details.
The Philippines continues to monitor the situation in Taiwan. China has declared a no-fly zone in the airspace near Taiwan, where it has been conducting live-fire military drills since Thursday, August 4. Taiwan has cancelled all commercial flights to Taipei until Sunday, August 7. China started launching military exercises around Taiwan following the visit of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Press Secretary Trixie Cruz Agila said the Marcos administration has no definite information yet and is carefully studying the situation. When the palace was asked what it will do to thousands of overseas Filipinos working in Taiwan if the situation escalates,
sa ngayon po, minomonitor natin ang sitwasyon. So, magre-react na lang po tayo matapos ang masusing pag-aaral at saka subject to the information that we get from that monitoring. Before that, the President will not yet issue a statement. Tignan po natin kung ano yung mga pangyayari. Nag-iingat po tayo dito sa mga ganitong klaseng sitwasyon.
Angeles has already echoed the Department of Foreign Affairs position that the country maintains its adherence to one China policy. On Saturday, August 6, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to meet with President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at Malacanang. However, the palace official could not confirm if the current situation in Taiwan would be part of the agenda.
Ay wala po talagang published na agenda. So, pati kami, we will find out about it if the President decides to address the issue after the meeting.
Cesar Alvarez reporting for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
The Philippine government is already preparing a contingency plan in any case the situation in Taiwan further escalates. Manila Economic and Cultural Officer MECO Chairman Silvestre Bello III said the Department of Labor and other agencies are getting ready for any eventualities. Based on MECO's data, Filipinos working in Taiwan have reached more than 200,000. Bello said Filipinos are currently safe. He added that the Taiwan government also vowed to extend its assistance to Filipinos and provide them with food and other necessities if needed. Coming right up, the Philippines records its highest inflation since 2018 at 6.4%. North Korea claims to have recovered from COVID outbreak. And White House declares monkeypox a public health emergency. These and more stories when we return.
Sa creativity, pang malakasan tayo mga Pinoy dyan. Mula sa music, pelikula, paintings, at kung ano-ano pang artistic media. Magaling tayo dyan. Halina't basagin natin ang misteryo ng itlog art.
Burning desire po kasi yung nagtutulak sa'yo na gawin yung mga ganyang obra. Passion po siya. Nagbibigay saya sa inyo habang ginagawa niyo.
Drawing inspiration from malunggay. Na bukod sa superfood ay BFF pa ng lahat ng breastfeeding mothers. Nakagawa ng isang healthy alternative to coffee ang isang enterprising mommy. Starting with a dream and just 2 liters of Carabao's milk, nagawa niyang palaki ng kanyang negosyo.
It takes courage, it takes effort, it takes passion for you to succeed in business.
Isa siyang teacher mula sa Imos, Cavite at nakatira sa isang barangay na madalas bisitahin ng pagbaha. Kaya naman nung tumama si Ulysses, naging tulay ito. Hindi lamang para maging viral ang kanyang extraordinary heroism. Ako po ang inyong host, Aga Mulak, na laging nagpapaalala sa inyo, you can be the hero that someone needs.
Welcome back to Mata ng Agila International. A faster increase in prices drove the country's inflation rate to a 45-month high in July. Mean Corvera reports.
The country's inflation rate accelerated further in July, hitting a 45-month high of 6.4%. Data from the Philippine Statistics Authority shows that the July inflation rate is higher than 6.1% in June and is almost double of 3.7% recorded for the same period in 2021. PSA statistician Undersecretary Dennis Mapa said the high inflation for July was driven by a faster increase in food prices like those of pork, fish, egg, refined sugar, and bread. Prices of rice also slightly increased in July. The earlier fuel price hikes also drove a fare increase among public utility vehicles, which affected commodity prices. Meanwhile, increase in prices of commodities and services in Metro Manila was much slower in July at 5.7%.
Malaking may contribution sa pagtaas ng inflation. Ngayong buwan ng Hulyo ay basically yung food basket natin. Ang food and non-alcoholic beverages, ang inflation niya ay 6.9%. At ito ay malaki ang contribution sa overall inflation. Kung titingnan pa natin pagbaba, yung pagkain lang, yung food basket lang, ang inflation ng food basket natin ay nasa 7.1%.
Malacanang said the administration had expected the inflation rate to further grow. Press Secretary Trixie Cruz Angeles told reporters that these figures were projected and were even mentioned in the President's State of the Nation address.
I understand that these were projected even before, given the inputs on due to the international events that have led to the increase in the prices of petroleum. So all of this had been factored and in fact was even mentioned in the State of the Nation of the President. So yes, it's part of it. We have expected this. So we'll just wait until it evens out.
Mean Corvera reporting for Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
The Philippine government's debt reached 12.79 trillion pesos at the end of June 2022. The Bureau of Treasury said the national government's debt portfolio climbed by 296.06 billion pesos or 2.4% in June due to the issuances of domestic and external loans as well as currency adjustments. Of the total debt stock, 31.5% was sourced externally, while 68.5% were domestic borrowings. The government's domestic borrowings amounted to 8.77 trillion, a 1.2% or 101.66 billion pesos higher compared to the end of May 2022 level. For the month, the increase in domestic debt was due to the net issuance of 96.30 pesos or 30 billion pesos in government securities and the 5.36 billion peso impact of local currency depreciation against the US dollar.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has named more appointees to government agencies. In a statement, Press Secretary Trixie Cruz Angeles says the president has appointed Attorney Mona Lisa Di Malanta as chairperson of the Energy Regulatory Commission, or ERC. Di Malanta is a graduate of the University of the Philippines and was the former chief legal counsel and compliance officer of Aboitiz Power Corporation. She also served as chairperson of the National Renewable Energy Board, or NREB. Meanwhile, the Department of Transportation has announced President Marcos Jr.'s appointment of new officials to the Philippine National Railways and the Light Rail Transit Authority. In a statement, the DOTR said Jeremy Regino is the new acting general manager of the PNR, while Henry Uri was appointed as an acting member of the PNR Board of Directors. The DOTR also announced the designation of Attorney Hernando Cabrera as LRTA's new administrator. He served as the agency spokesperson prior to his appointment.
The Philippines has detected 104 more cases of highly transmissible Omicron subvariants BA5, BA4, and BA2.12.1. Amid the rising COVID infections, the country is still in the low-risk category, except for Metro Manila and CAR, which have elevated to the moderate risk classification. Vin Pascua reports.
The country stays in the low-risk category for COVID-19, but its two regions have been elevated to the moderate risk classification. Aside from the National Capital Region with an average daily attack rate, or ADAR, of 8.67, the Cordillera Administrative Region was also elevated to moderate risk with its 6.10 ADAR. Calabarzon's ADAR also rose to 4.8, nearing the border of moderate risk. Last week, the Department of Health logged 25,967 cases nationwide, or 3,710 daily cases. But Health Officer in charge, Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere, expects these to further increase, reaching 4,400 daily by August 15 or 6,194 by the end of August. And should the public continue to ignore health protocols and the vaccine and booster rates remain low, COVID-19 infections may reach 90,000 by the end of the month. The DOH said the rate of infection has also accelerated in other parts of Luzon, which logged more than 1,000 daily cases, while other areas in Mindanao have experienced a plateau. The DOH also recorded more cases of Omicron subvariants in the country. 95 new cases of BA5 were detected. 83 of them have fully recovered, while the other 5 are still in isolation. The country also reported 7 new cases of BA4 and 2 BA2.12.1, but all patients have already recovered. Vin Pascua reporting for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Pyongyang reported 0 fever cases today for a 7th straight day, according to state media KCNA. The report said everyone who had fallen sick since the country confirmed its first COVID-19 infections had recovered. It added that the overall anti-epidemic situation of the DPRK has entered a definite phase of stability. North Korea vowed to strengthen its monitoring of new COVID-19 subvariants and various diseases, saying it can mobilize medical workers in case of a crisis. The isolated country, which has maintained a rigid coronavirus blockade since the start of the pandemic, announced an Omicron outbreak in May and activated a maximum emergency epidemic prevention system. State media have meticulously reported the official number of cases, deaths, treatments, and recoveries ever since, with leader Kim Jong-un putting himself front and center of the government's response. However, experts say Pyongyang has one of the world's worst healthcare systems, with poorly equipped hospitals, few intensive care units, and no COVID-19 treatment drugs or vaccines.
President Biden's health secretary has declared the growing monkeypox outbreak a national health emergency. Health Secretary Xavier Becerra's announcement is a rare move, signaling that the virus now presents a significant risk to Americans. It also sets in motion measures aimed at containing the monkeypox threat. The health secretary said at a news briefing that they're prepared to take their response to the next level in addressing the virus, and they urge every American to take monkeypox seriously. Becerra's declaration comes more than a week after the WHO stated a global health emergency over the outbreak. It also gives power to federal agencies to direct money toward developing and evaluating vaccines and drugs, access emergency funding, and hire additional workers to help manage the outbreak. Declaring the emergency would not ease the vaccine shortage, but the administration may take steps to allow quicker access to tecovirimat, the drug recommended for treating the disease. As of Wednesday, the United States has recorded nearly 7,000 monkeypox cases, with the highest rates per capita in Washington, New York, and Georgia. More than 99% of the cases are among men who have sex with men.
Thailand's prime minister ordered an investigation into a massive blaze that tore through a nightclub, killing at least 14 people. The fire broke out around 1 a.m. local time at the Mountain Bee night spot in Satahip district, about 150 kilometers southeast of Bangkok. Video footage posted by a rescue service showed desperate revelers fleeing the club, screaming with their clothes ablaze as a huge fire raged in the background. A rescue foundation said 14 people were killed and around 40 injured. The service said the blaze was accelerated by flammable acoustic foam on the walls of the club, and it took firefighters more than 3 hours to bring it under control. Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha offered condolences to the victims' families and said he had ordered a probe into the fire. The dead, 4 women and 10 men, were found mostly crowded by the entrance and in the bathroom, their bodies severely burned. They were aged between 17 and 49, and all are believed to have been Thai.
5 people were killed and 8 injured in a fiery car crash in Los Angeles, California. California Highway Patrol said the crash in the busy Windsor Hills area involved 6 to 7 vehicles, 3 of which caught fire. A pregnant woman and her unborn fetus, a 3-year-old child, and 2 other adults were killed in the crash and the fire that ensued. CPH said 2 adults and 6 minors were immediately taken to area hospitals after the crash. Authorities believe that a Mercedes-Benz traveling at high speed ran a red light and started the crash. Images from the scene show 2 burned vehicles, one of which was split in half and appears to have crashed into a pole. The extent of the injuries and additional information about the people killed, including whether they were in vehicles or pedestrians, was not immediately available. The CPH is still investigating the heartbreaking incident.
In Mexico, relatives of 10 miners trapped in a coal mine keep a grim watch near the site of the cave-in. Around 230 Army and other government personnel have been deployed to the scene. Government officials say the miners had been doing excavation work when they hit an adjoining area full of water on Wednesday. That caused the shaft to collapse and flood. Several pumps are now being used to tackle the flooding and rescue the miners as soon as possible. 5 miners managed to make it out alive. 3 of them remain in hospital. Coming up, Turkey says 3 more grain ships leave Ukraine. Kremlin strongly responds to German turbine accusations. And U.S. announces new strategies to combat mental health crisis. These news and more when Mata ng Agila International returns.
cannot deny that the value of our money now can afford much less than it could a year ago. Maraming mga bagay ang nakaapekto sa ating ekonomiya at ang karamihan sa atin ay nagulat dahil tayo ay hindi handa. How do we stretch our budget and still save a few? Kapos na nga ang pera, mag-i-invest pa ba? Perhaps it's timely for us to discuss how we can mitigate the effects of the economic crunch and still be able to tide over the wave of financial uncertainties by learning how to grow our money.
If you live simply, then what you need to save will be a smaller amount. But if you live grand, and of course, mas malaki rin yung kailangan mong ipunin. It's not what you make, it's what you save.
Open for Business with Cesar Vallejos, Sunday, 9 p.m.
This portion is brought to you by Source Alliance.
And we now bring you more stories here on Mata ng Agila International. 3 more ships loaded with grain are sailing from Ukraine under a UN-backed deal lifting Russia's blockade of the Black Sea. Turkey's defense ministry confirmed that the Panama-flagged Navy Star left Odessa for Ireland with 33,000 tons of grain. 2 ships left the port of Chornomorsk. The Malta-flagged Rohan is headed to Britain with 13,000 tons of grain, and the Turkish-flagged Polar Net sailed towards Turkey with 12,000 tons of grain. Turkey's defense ministry added that an empty Barbados-flagged ship, the Fulmar, is headed to the port of Chornomorsk to be loaded with grain. Moscow and Kyiv agreed in Istanbul last month to resume shipments of wheat and other grain from Ukrainian ports for the first time since the conflict started. Earlier this week, the Sierra Leone-flagged Razoni, loaded with 26,000 tons of maize, set off from Odessa for the Lebanese port of Tripoli. The international team overseeing the passage said in a statement the first ship's successful passage offered proof of concept that the agreement can hold.
U.S. basketball star Brittany Griner has been sentenced to 9 years in prison by a Russian court for drug smuggling. The 31-year-old athlete also has to pay a 1 million ruble fine. That works out to more than $16,000 US or more than 921,000 pesos. Following the sentencing, U.S. President Joe Biden released a statement calling the action unacceptable. Biden repeated a pledge to do all that he can to repatriate Griner. White House spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre says an offer is on the table to bring Griner home.
As you all know, we have made a substantial offer to bring her and Paul Whelan home. We urge Russia to accept that proposal. I'm not able to share more publicly at this time, but we are willing to take every step necessary to bring home our people, as we demonstrated with Trevor Reed. And that's what we're going to do here.
Still on Griner, Phoenix Mercury and Connecticut Sun players linked arms in 42 seconds of silence before their game in solidarity with WNBA star Brittany Griner, who was sentenced to 9 years in prison in Russia. The number honored Griner's jersey number 42, and the gesture brought tears to the eyes of players from both teams and from fans at Mohegan Sun Arena in Uncasville, Connecticut, where the moment ended with chants of "Bring her home." The United States government has declared that Griner was wrongfully detained in Russia, and Sun player Breonna Jones said players from both teams wanted to show their support. The verdict and sentence was widely condemned in the United States as unjustified and sparked urgent calls for the U.S. government to bring Griner home. Griner was convicted and sentenced in a Russian court on charges of smuggling cannabis vape cartridges into the country.
Moscow has strongly rejected claims that Russian energy giant Gazprom was inventing pretexts for not accepting delivery of a crucial part for the Nord Stream pipeline, and by doing so is suppressing gas flow to the EU. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Gazprom would really like to get the turbine, but it wasn't Gazprom that imposed the sanctions. Peskov added that in this case, it is important for the gas company to get legal documents stating that the turbine is not under sanctions. Words are absolutely not enough. Kremlin's comments come after Siemens Energy accused Gazprom of lying when it said international sanctions were preventing the return of a turbine for the Nord Stream 1 pipeline from Germany to Russia.
Rishi Sunak appeared to score a surprise win with a studio audience at a key debate with frontrunner Liz Truss in the race to become Britain's next prime minister. While opinion polls backed Truss to win the vote among Conservative Party members, those sitting in the audience at Sky News debate overwhelmingly supported Sunak in a show of hands after an electronic voting system broke down.
You said the number one thing we have to do is not make the situation worse. What is causing the recession? Right? As you heard from the Bank of England today, and I think Liz said something before, which I'm just going to correct, it's not the tax burden that is causing the recession. That's simply wrong. What's causing the recession is inflation. Right? That's the root of the problems we have, not just here, but in America and elsewhere.
If we put that another way, Shell made £1,190 per second. So since I started this sentence, they've made £17,000 in profit. Why don't we have another windfall tax?
Well, the problem with a windfall tax is that it might secure money in the short term. But what it does is it puts off companies investing in Britain in the long term because they think at any point they could be taxed.
Truss had also earlier been forced into another U-turn after a damaging statement by her campaign team that the government could save £8.8 billion or $10.75 billion a year if it paid lower salaries to public sector workers who lived outside London. However, Truss insisted the proposal was misinterpreted or misrepresented by the media. The final vote showed a larger number of hands for Sunak than for Truss, as Kay Burley admitted that it was not expected. The result of the vote between Truss and Sunak to decide who will replace Prime Minister Boris Johnson is due on September 5.
Shouting fair wages. Hundreds of teachers, university professors, hospital workers, and public administration retirees marched in Caracas to demand the revision of salary tables and the payment of outstanding benefits. The protest was guarded in several sections by security agents and passed without altercations. While public workers' salaries were readjusted this year, the amount, which can range from $50 to $100 depending on the length of service, remains insufficient to cover a basic basket estimated at nearly $500. Teacher Yuli Gutierrez says she came out to protest, hoping that the situation of staff working for government institutions will be reviewed. Like Gutierrez, Jose Cadiz, a 46-year-old nurse, walked barefoot while showing his broken shoes, saying for many it is impossible to afford clothes and shoes. Having retired after 36 years as a nurse in public hospitals, Emida Carmona joined the crowd and marched with an empty saucepan. The minimum wage in Venezuela increased 1,700% in March to 126 bolivars, equivalent to $22 at the official rate of the day.
The United States announces 2 new strategies to address an unprecedented youth mental health crisis gripping the country. Chrisanne Fragata has the details.
According to the U.S. Department of Education, at present, more than 40% of teenagers state that they struggle with persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. More than half of parents and caregivers express concern over their children's mental well-being. To address the crisis, the Biden-Harris administration announces 2 new actions to strengthen school-based mental health services and address the youth mental health crisis. 1, by awarding the first of nearly $300 million through the fiscal year 2022 bipartisan omnibus agreement to expand access to mental health services in schools. Second, by encouraging governors to invest more in school-based mental health services. The Education Department says even before the pandemic, rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts among youth have been trending upward. The pandemic has exacerbated those issues, disrupting learning, relationships, and routines, and increasing isolation, especially among the nation's young people. President Joe Biden puts forward a comprehensive national strategy to tackle the unprecedented mental health crisis. He calls for a major transformation in how mental health is understood, accessed, treated, and integrated in and out of healthcare settings. Kristen Fargada, Washington, D.C., Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Vigilante violence in South Africa as a mob, frustrated with police inaction, took matters into their own hands. Protesters hunted down suspected illegal immigrant minors believed to be responsible for the gang rape of 8 women last week. The women had been part of the cast of a music video when a gang attacked the cast and crew setting up for the production. Armed with machetes, spades, and hammers, residents in Krugersdorp beat the suspects and set fire to their homes. They shut down informal mine shafts. One community member, Kelly Mack, says they had no choice but to act because law enforcement has let them down.
If the police cannot help us, then we have to take the law into our own hands. There is no other way. There's nothing else we can do.
Police have arrested about 80 of the minors, charging them with being in the country illegally. But no one has been charged yet for the rapes.
4 American police officers have been charged in the death of Breonna Taylor, a woman shot to death in a botched raid in her home 2 years ago. The 4 officers from Louisville, Kentucky face civil rights charges, as well as unlawful conspiracy, unconstitutional use of force, and obstruction charges. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland says the actions of the police officers were deliberate.
We allege that the defendants knew their actions in falsifying the affidavit could create a dangerous situation, and we allege these unlawful acts resulted in Ms. Taylor's death. The charges announced today also allege that the officers responsible for falsifying the affidavit that led to the search took steps to cover up their unlawful conduct after Ms. Taylor was killed.
Taylor and her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, were sleeping in her apartment when they heard a noise at the door around midnight on March 13, 2020. Fearing it was a break-in, Walker fired his gun, wounding 1 police officer. Police responded, firing 30 shots and fatally wounding Taylor. Police had obtained a no-knock warrant to make a drug arrest.
Firefighters backed by more than 20 aircraft battled a wildfire in northwestern Spain, which appears to have been started deliberately. Fanned by strong winds and a heat wave, the blaze has already destroyed some 600 hectares of forest and scrubland in Galicia. The regional government said that in a statement. The fire started out in several spots near the town of Verín, the border with Portugal, which is experiencing its worst drought in a century. Scientists say human-induced climate change is making extreme weather events, including heat waves and droughts, more frequent and more intense. They, in turn, increase the risk of fires, which emit climate-heating greenhouse gases. The flames have destroyed nearly 230,000 hectares, more than in any other nation in Europe, according to the European Union Satellite Monitoring Service, EFIS. Up next, South Korea confirms its first lunar orbiter was successfully launched by SpaceX. Shell staff gets profits bonus as energy bills soar. And Jamaica's Rashid Broadbell nabs Commonwealth victory. Find out more about these news when Matanang Agila International returns.
Konnichiwa! Lalakbay naman tayo sa Japan sa episode na to kasamang napaka-game na magluto na si Heaven Peralejo.
Hi, Heaven!
Excited ka na ba?
Yakitori, katsudon, chahan, at simple ramen. Authentic, masarap, madaling gawin at abot kaya ng budget.
Kita-kits sa Lutong Plaza.
Together, when I talo pag together, let's together. Sunday
25. Seoul confirms the successful launch of South Korea's first lunar orbiter on a year-long mission to observe the moon.
오늘 시각으로 오전 8시 8분 48초에 미국 플로리다주에 있는 케이프 커네버럴 우주군 기지에서 스페이스 X사의 펠컨 9 발사체로 우리나라 최초의 달 궤도선인 다누리가 발사되었습니다. 다누리는 60여 분이 지난 오전 8시 48분경 발사체와 정상적으로 분리되었으며 달을 향한 궤도에 성공적으로 진입하였음을 말씀드립니다.
Danuri, a portmanteau of the Korean words for moon and enjoy, aims to reach the moon by mid-December. Danuri will use 6 different instruments, including a highly sensitive camera provided by NASA, to conduct research and investigate the lunar surface to identify potential landing sites. One of the instruments will evaluate disruption-tolerant, network-based space communication, which, according to South Korea's Science Ministry, is a world's first.
The first Egyptians and Portuguese nationals have had a taste of space travel aboard Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin spacecraft. The reusable craft blasted into space Thursday from a launch pad in the West Texas desert. The flight was a short one, lasting only 11 minutes. But at its height, the capsule coasted above the internationally recognized space boundary, 100 kilometers above sea level. Both the rocket and capsule returned to the base. All 6 crew members were paying passengers. Blue Origin has not revealed its ticket price, but past flights have included celebrity guests who have flown for free, including Star Trek legend William Shatner.
American import and export figures for the month of June are in, and it's good news for the U.S. Bobby Soriano in New York has the details.
American exports had another record month in June, while American imports have cooled off, leading to a narrowing of the U.S. trade gap for the third consecutive month. According to the latest official data from the U.S. Commerce Department, goods and services exports rose by $4.3 billion last month to $260.8 billion, topping the prior record set in May, while imports fell by $1 billion. That trimmed the U.S. trade deficit by 6.2% to $79.6 billion, the data showed. Sales of U.S. goods being exported or sent abroad were boosted by gold, natural gas, aircraft, foods, and animal feed. Petroleum exports were also the highest on record at $29.1 billion. The record levels of exports and international trade have been a direct result of the war in Ukraine, with countries looking for alternatives to Russian energy and alternatives to Ukraine's own exports, which have been cut by more than half due to the ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, goods and services coming into the United States have cooled off from their meteoric rise since pandemic restrictions lessened halfway through last year, with the imports of autos and auto parts falling sharply in recent months. Companies had initially rushed to replenish depleted inventories amid strong demand from American shoppers, but inflation has led to that demand calming down as many families are pulling back on the purchasing of unnecessary goods. Economists expect that the trade gap will continue to narrow in the second half of 2022 as consumer sentiment remains negative in the sight of stubborn inflation. Bobby Soriano, Matalang Agila International, New York, New York. Trusted, connected, on point.
Walmart has begun to lay off corporate employees after it slashed its profit outlook and warned that consumers had pulled back on discretionary spending due to inflation. In a statement to CNBC, the retail giant described the layoffs as a way to better position the company for a strong future. Instead of stating how many workers will be affected and what divisions have experienced cuts, Walmart spokesperson Ann Hatfield said Walmart is still hiring in parts of its business that are growing, including supply chain, e-commerce, health and wellness, and advertising sales. According to Hatfield, Walmart is doing some restructuring to make sure its policies are aligned. The company said at the time that as shoppers spent more on necessities such as groceries and fuel, they were skipping over high-margin merchandise, including apparel. It said it would have to cut prices to sell more of those items. Walmart added that the adjustments will set new ways of coping with the ever-changing needs of the consumers.
Energy giant Shell is to give its workers a one-off 8% bonus after the company reported a record of second quarter profit of £9 billion from high oil and gas prices. Most of the 82,000 staff it employs worldwide will get the pay boost. However, top executives will be excluded. The company said the award reflected its financial success and was not a response to the rising cost of living. The firm's huge increase in profits has been fueled by higher prices of oil and gas, which have risen sharply due to Moscow and Kyiv's conflict. The energy giant added that giving out bonuses to its workers is in recognition of the contribution of their people have made to Shell's strong operational performance against a recent challenging backdrop. Shell has also said it would return billions of dollars to its shareholders after posting its quarterly financial results last month.
Jamaica's Rashid Broadbell cruised to victory in the 110-meter hurdles on Thursday as Australia won a cycling road race double. Now from the UK, here's Keith Dimabuyu.
Jamaica's Rashid Broadbell equaled Colin Jackson's 32-year-old Commonwealth Games record as he cruised to victory in the 110-meter hurdles on Thursday as Australia won a cycling road race double. Broadbell's performance lit up a low-key evening athletics session in Birmingham, which was still a 30,000 sellout. Laquan Nairn gave the Bahamas their first ever men's long jump gold, while Australia's Matthew Denny won the discus, with England's Lawrence Okoye taking silver. In the men's individual cycling time trial, Australia's two-time world champion Rohan Dennis won gold as former Tour de France winner Geraint Thomas took bronze despite a crash. In the boxing competition, Welsh identical twins Eoin and Garen Croft, 20, are both guaranteed at least bronze medals, while brother and sister Aidan and Michaela Walsh are also guaranteed medals for Northern Ireland. England's 2020 women's cricketers beat New Zealand by 7 wickets to set up a semi-final against India, while favourites Australia will face New Zealand. Canada won gold in the rhythmic gymnastics team event, with Australia second and England third. From London, United Kingdom, this is Keith Mabuyu for Matanang Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
A judge has ruled Hollywood movie star Kevin Spacey will have to pay $31 million to the production company that fired him from House of Cards. This after allegations of sexual harassment emerged. The court also dismissed Spacey's appeal against arbitration. An arbitrator in 2020 ordered the American Beauty actor to compensate the company for losses and costs associated with the change or the charge. MRC, the production company, sought the damages after booting Spacey from the lead role, a move that forced them to reconfigure the show's 6th season. Spacey's lawyers had argued that the arbitrator exceeded the scope of his powers by considering certain evidence in deciding damages. But Los Angeles Superior Court Judge Mel Redracana confirmed the award of $29.5 million in damages and the remainder in costs and fees. The arbitrator had found that Spacey was in breach of his contract because of his alleged behavior, noting that even if the matter was not so clear-cut, the arbitrator's award would stand. The ruling is the latest blow for a man once heralded as one of the finest actors of his generation. It comes weeks after he appeared in a British court to plead not guilty to charges of sexually assaulting 3 men. The actor is also scheduled to appear in a New York court on October 4 for a civil lawsuit filed against him by actor Anthony Rapp.
An out-of-tune Bangladeshi singer with a huge internet following was hauled in by police at dawn and told to cease his painful renditions of classical songs, sparking a furor on social media. Take a look. Hero Alam, as he styles himself, has amassed nearly 2 million Facebook followers and almost 1.5 million on YouTube, as ridiculous as it sounds. With his unique crooning style and arresting raunchy videos. Now, one of his numbers, Arabian Song, has garnered 17 million views. Now there, he appears in traditional Arab clothing on a sand dune with camels superimposed in the background. Now, he has also drawn critics' scorn, particularly for versions of classical songs of 2 beloved national treasures, Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore and Bangladesh's national poet Qazi Nazrul Islam.
এখানে অবশ্যই তো অধিকার লঙ্ঘনের বিষয়টা অবশ্যই থাকে যে স্বাধীন বাংলাদেশ আমরা স্বাধীনতা মানে এটা যদি কথাবার্তা না বলতে পারি গান করতে না পারি বিনোদন করতে না পারি তাহলে তো অবশ্যই সময় না আমরা অধিকার কেড়ে নেওয়া আমি বলতাম যে নজরুল সঙ্গীত আমি একাই গেয়েছি রবীন্দ্রসঙ্গীত আমি একলাই গান গেয়েছি আর কেউ গায়নি সবাইকে যারা যারা গাইছে তাদেরকে সবাইকে ওখানে নিয়ে যাওয়া হয়েছে তাদেরকে সবাইকে বলা হয়েছে তাহলে বলতাম না তাহলে ওরা আমার উপর অন্যায় করেনি আমাকে বলতে বললে আমি চলে যেতাম আমাকে এখান থেকে নিয়ে যাওয়ার কোনো প্রশ্নই ওঠে না তাহলে ওরা আমাকে নিয়ে গেল ভালো নিয়ে যাওয়ার পরে তুই টাকার ব্যাপার যা ইচ্ছে ওরা তাই কথা বলতেছে
Meanwhile, Farouk Hussain, Deputy Police Commissioner of Dhaka, rejected claims by Alam that he had been pressed to change his name. Authorities also confirmed that their office received many complaints against the out-of-tune singer. Ridiculous. Dhaka's Chief Detective Harun or Rashid also told reporters that Alam had apologized for singing the cherished songs and for wearing police uniforms without permission in his videos.
On Thursday, Chile's eastern island began welcoming tourists for the first time since the pandemic began more than 2 years ago. For the past 2 years, without tourism income, islanders have resorted to bartering and planting their own vegetable gardens. A popular Pacific Ocean tourist destination, the island is famous for huge stone statues in human form, partially buried in the ground. Tourism is the backbone of the country's economy. In fact, the Easter Island alone used to receive 160,000 tourists per year, arriving on 2 flights daily. But the reopening will be gradual, beginning with only 2 flights a week. Visitors must also be fully vaccinated and show a negative PCR test. Eastern Island reported only 2 cases of COVID-19 with no deaths or hospitalizations.
And now let's learn about important events today in history. In 1962, 36-year-old Marilyn Monroe was found dead of a drug overdose in her Los Angeles home. An autopsy found a fatal amount of sedatives in her system. Decades after her death, Marilyn Monroe remains a major pop culture icon. In 1963, the U.S., the Soviet Union, and the U.K. signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in Moscow. A few months later, more than 100 other governments signed the treaty, notable exceptions being France and China. The Nuclear Test Ban Treaty banned nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater, but permitted underground testing. And in 2010, 33 workers got trapped after a mine in the Atacama Desert in Chile collapsed. During the 17-day period, the men had no contact with the surface. They subsisted on emergency rations intended to last 2 days, eating only once every other day and drinking water from a spring and from radiators. The subsequent rescue took 69 days, attracting international attention.
This week's newscast ends with a quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32nd U.S. president. Human kindness has never weakened the stamina or softened the fiber of a free people. A nation does not have to be cruel to be tough.
Just like the police in the music video guy. They don't have to.
I couldn't hold it. Neither could you.
I know. Well, that's a wrap for tonight's news. Catch latest updates on our social media channels. Have fun, you guys, this weekend. I'm CJ Hero.
And I'm Nina Richie Alago Flores, saying happy weekend to everybody. This is Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.